much for joining us today on Feelin Good, sponsored by Warren County Community Services. I'm Shelley Abrams, your host, and I'm delighted to be speaking with you today and also be able to introduce you to a person that I met, I was thinking about 2012, we actually met at a Chamber of Commerce function here in Warren County, and I invited Bob Viney to be a part of our Think Regional Southwest Ohio leadership team in, I believe it was 2014. And ever since then, I have learned more and more about his life, and it made me think when I read this article in the November edition of the ARP magazine about people age well where they have a purpose. And it made me think of Bob because of probably all of the people I know, he is one of the most purpose-driven people that I know. And I thought it would be interesting today to introduce you to Bob Viney and have him share a little bit about his journey in purpose. So thanks for joining us today, Bob.
Glad to be here. Thank you for that nice introduction.
I'm happy you had time to meet with us here on Feelin Good. I think, don't you, as we talk with more people that are contemporaries of ours, I'm 68, and Bob just entered the 70s. I'm hearing more and more of our friends and associates talking about whether or not to retire, or once they have retired, what to do now in retirement and so forth. And when I ran across this article, which I read just recently, about people aging well where they have a purpose, I got to thinking of the different people that I know that do have a very purpose-filled life and have had ever since they were younger as well. And I can always tell in interactions with them that no matter what they engage in, they always seem to find a purpose. So with that being said, I certainly saw that in you when I met you. And first of all, I'd like for you to share with the audience a little bit about your background and the beginning of your purpose-filled journey.
I'd be happy to. I was pretty lucky. I found a purpose for my life in my home when I was growing up. My dad was an officer in the Navy for a 20-year career, but he took the oath of office the first time out of high school, enlisting in the Navy at the start of World War II, and then volunteering to go through officer training at the Naval Academy, which is where he spent most of the war years, although he did serve on a cruiser in the North Atlantic early in 1942. Then I learned growing up that my grandfather actually took the oath of office to serve in the State Department in China at the age of 25 in 1907. Myself, I took the oath of office to serve the country at 17 when I entered the Naval Academy. I took it again at graduation at 21 when I was commissioned, and I took it twice more every time I was promoted to another rank during my 6-year career. And I served during a pretty active time of conflict during the Vietnam and the Cold War on a nuclear submarine in the Pacific, which was one of the critical theaters, obviously, during that period.
Well, speaking of the Pacific, your beginnings, because you were part of a naval family,
right,
really started in Hawaii, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I was born in Hawaii when my dad was stationed there on his first ship out of the Naval Academy, and then he went to submarine school. So I actually had my first Christmas at the submarine school when he was a student, and then his last job was academic director at the submarine school while I was in high school. So I was kind of destined by fate and circumstance probably for this direction in my career.
Right. Although you were born in Hawaii, but you ended up graduating from high school in
Connecticut.
In Groton, Connecticut.
Yeah,
right,
I did.
Right. Okay.
But then I went back to Hawaii to serve. The submarine I was on was based in Hawaii. So lucky to be there several times in my life growing up. So that still sticks with me today. That sense of purpose that and the satisfaction you get out of serving a goal, a purpose, an entity beyond your own self-interest. Obviously, you don't go into the Navy if you want to be a millionaire by the time you're 30. You don't go in there to make a ton of money. So that was never a purpose for me. Mm-hmm. When I left the military and came to Cincinnati for the first time to work for P&G, I still had that sense of purpose. And what I found at P&G was a company that, although it's definitely been very successful at making profit, that profit is not in their purpose. If you read their purpose statement, the purpose is making consumer products that exceed the expectations of our customers in improving their lives. So the idea of touching life, improving lives, is really at the core of what they do. And they believe if they do that, if they fulfill that purpose, then they're going to make good share, good market share, good revenue, good profitability, and their shareholders and consumers and employees all will benefit.
Right.
And they have that kind of holistic sense of purpose. And as you look across all the businesses that have existed since the 1800s, they obviously have done very well with that kind of focus.
And even today, I think they still have that value-driven purpose, right, in their business mission.
I haven't been associated with them since 1991, but I have been. One of the ways I have given back is working with some former P&G alumni, we call ourselves, to organize a nonprofit, the Procter & Gamble Alumni Network, back in 2000. We started with 6 people and no money. We now have over 45,000 members on every continent on the globe, and we have about 40 active chapters, local chapters, working around the globe. And we've raised and donated over $1 million in the first 10 years to empowering economic development in various parts of the world that are undeveloped, including within the U.S. And our goal is 10 times that in the next 10 years. Now, I have stepped away from that role because I have other purposes
now
that are more important to me than that was or was after 17 years.
Right.
But my last role at P&G was on the environment. So I was in charge of communicating what P&G was doing in environmental initiatives, and at the time they were the first company to actually use recycled plastic from packaging in making new packaging. And what I learned in that role was you can have all the curbside pickup you want, but if nobody's using the materials that are sent into the recycling system
right.
to make something else, all that stuff goes to landfills.
Exactly. So you were a part also of kind of teaching the community how to use the recycling system as well,
Well, we wanted to teach people that we were making that step,
right?
so that if the consumer walks down the aisle and they care about that they have the information so that they can make one of the choices. Can be that product uses recycled materials, this one doesn't.
Right.
I think I'm going to go with the product that uses recycled materials.
Well, speaking of packaging, I remember it was one of the first stories that you ever shared with me, and I thought it might be interesting for our audience to hear this story as well.
Well, it's an example of what we've been talking about, that if you follow the purpose that's not financially related and you follow it well, you can have tremendous financial results. So
You just happen to have,
this is how liquids are we're always packaged,
Okay.
right? You have a cap and threads on the bottle, and the cap went over the threads. Well, I was given Tide liquid, and the charge was we need to use the cap as the measuring device. And we learned, excuse me, very quickly that if you pour liquid in here and then put it on after the liquid's been poured into the washer,
right?
it's going to drip down the outside of the bottle. It's going to work its way down the threads. So that would have meant consumers hated it.
Right.
So
yes.
we said, how do we fix that problem? No one had ever invented a different kind of cap design. So the engineers, the packaging engineers, said, what if we take the threads out of the inside and put them on the outside? Then the cap is clean, it's smooth. When we measure, it doesn't drip down, it goes back into the bottle.
Right.
And that's not only a good idea from a convenience standpoint, but it saves whatever residue was in here. You don't have to rinse it out.
Right.
It goes back into the bottle. And of course, then they developed a pour spout that went in there too, which was another convenient advantage. And when people saw this package for the first time in research, it broke the record at the time in all the research that P&G has ever done for consumer preference. 95% preferred that over regular package designs.
Amazing.
And that wasn't even part of the project design. It just came out of my little group saying, how are we going to do this and really satisfy the customer?
So with that in mind, innovation just sort of sprung forth, and collaboration with your team and so on and so forth.
When you have a group, I learned that in leadership in the Navy. When you lead, your job is not to be the smartest person in the room. Actually, most leaders that surround themselves with people who are smarter than they are achieve much more than a leader who believes, I'm the smartest person in the room and I really don't need these other people. And who would want to work for that kind of leader,
Right.
right?
Right.
But the other kind of leader motivates everybody to be their best. And I was very fortunate to have some very smart people. And all I had to do as the team leader was invite them in to work with me. I don't have all the best ideas. I need yours. I didn't design that cap. I just said we have to do better than the cap we have. And I just kept asking questions.
Well, now did the product design, the packaging design idea come before you were chosen to go into Asia and work, or did that happen?
It was in between.
Okay. Right.
I first went to Japan, where we were for 2.5 years, came back to the U.S. and became the Tide brand manager, and then went back to Asia and led the P&G organization, starting up a business in Taiwan.
from kind of
Zero.
ground zero.
Yes, totally zero.
Yes, yes. And then you build it into a very successful brand.
Yeah, by the time I left, we had about a $40 million business in Taiwan, profitable. We had entered 6 consumer categories, and we were the category leader in 5. You know, I'm working with good material.
Right.
The products and the packaging and the people at Procter & Gamble are probably the best in the world in that area. And all I had to do was find a way to communicate it in a relevant way to the Taiwan consumer. And that was my role as the marketing director.
And interestingly enough, you had to learn that culture, right? And
You did.
adapt to what was important for the folks you were going to be selling to.
You can't sell household products to people who have a totally different culture than you do if you don't understand it. And I learned that in Japan. I was the brand manager of a detergent, and we did not have whisk. And if you remember, I'm sure a lot of the
Audience
viewers will,
right?
ring around the collar, right? Whisk got out, ring around the collar. That was the strongest liquid advertising for decades. And when I got to Japan, Procter & Gamble had beat whisk into the marketplace and had decided to use ring around the collar. And in Japanese, that's called yogore no kubiwa, necklace of dirt,
Oh,
is how you literally translate ring around the collar.
okay.
And they use the same technique as in the U.S., embarrassing people in public because they had yogore no kubiwa, right?
Okay.
Totally anti-cultural. Nobody in Japan would ever intentionally embarrass a stranger in public. So when I saw that advertising, I quickly had to get the company away from that, because we were not culturally relevant at all. We were anti-cultural. And so when I went to Taiwan about 6 years later, I took that lesson and I started learning the culture. I learned some of the language. And luckily I had people in the State Department in Taiwan. It was actually not called the State Department because we'd done the two China thing at that time. You had to understand that as well.
Right.
But it was called the American Institute in Taiwan, but it was State Department people. And they educated me. I asked for and I got the help in understanding the culture of China, which goes back 5,000 years.
Very good. So your purpose at that point in your life was very specific, probably, in terms of working,
Right.
and branding and so on.
It was about people,
right.
the people on my team, and making sure they were developing. It was about the consumers, making sure that we were relevant and providing them a benefit that improved their life in some small way. And then it was about profit. You know, you had to manage the resources you were given so that you bring those things together and the business grows.
Okay. Very good. So what part of that business experience was the bridge to your next purpose-filled part of your life?
Well, coming back to Cincinnati after leaving P&G and working in other businesses for 17, 18 more years, and then coming back to Cincinnati in 2006, working in a consulting business with a lot of travel. That business died in the 2008 recession. So I wanted to find a business, and at that time I thought my purpose really at this stage in life is becoming give back. So I found a executive business coaching firm that I was able to join as a franchise owner, and I worked helping small businesses. So I thought, what a great way to leverage all the experience I have and the expertise I have. I'm going to help other small business owners succeed in growing their business, adding to the economic growth in our region here in Cincinnati, creating more jobs, and improving the quality of life.
Right. And that's when I met you during the business coaching years, because we were at a Chamber of Commerce event and so forth. And you actually volunteered to come and speak to the ambassadors group at Warren County United Way at that time when I worked with them, which we really appreciated, that contribution as well. So then the business coaching, you're reaching out to a number of different folks, and your network is expanding with the P&G Alumni Network, and several other projects then resulted from that.
Yeah, well, Think Regional became one that we spent a lot of time on, trying to develop that into an event that would draw, where it is today, drawing about 150 leaders from nonprofit, business, government,
Education,
healthcare, from across 15 counties, and coming together to work on the 6 factors that drive economic growth, job creation, and quality of life in the region. And the message being, we can make more progress in our region if we work together than if we try to compete with each other and achieve those goals just in our own city or county.
Right.
I also met a professor at UC and was offered the opportunity to be an adjunct professor and share my leadership experiences with students in the organizational leadership program there. I also started working with a small group on bringing pieces of the USS Cincinnati,
That's
a
right.
fast attack nuclear submarine from the Cold War days, to Cincinnati as part of a memorial to recognize tri-state citizens and companies that contributed to the victory of the Cold War, to educate students today about what the Cold War was, why it was important, how we won it. Those are great lessons for the future. And then also to use the technology that's in a submarine to teach STEM applications,
Right.
science, technology, engineering, and math applications via kiosks that'll sit around the memorial. So I've been working on that. I got invited to join the West Point Society. You always think of Army and Navy as being like this,
Right.
but that's only for a few hours on one day a year. And the rest of the time, we actually work together as part of the combined forces for the U.S., protecting the U.S. So the West Point alumni invited me to join a program they do called Leaders of Character. And we have taught every year representatives from about 95 high schools in the greater Cincinnati area the principles of value-centered leadership and how they can become leaders of character in their own schools and in their own lives. And then finally, I was invited by the Department of Energy office here in Cincinnati to speak to their group on a Veterans Day event, 2010, I think. And I learned that they actually run something called the High School Science Bowl. And it's a competition for STEM-related topics among the high school areas. And whoever wins actually goes to a national competition in Washington, D.C. So I got involved with facilitating that. So I actually sit as one of the judges, run the time, keep the score, while you listen to high school students who know more than you do about any of those topics.
Right, indeed. So your outreach has led to other branching outreach
Right.
for more and more projects and so forth,
Right.
which is very inspiring and it's got to be very energizing for you to always have important focus on these different topics to think about, to work on, and so forth. And luckily, you make the time to devote to those different priorities now.
Yeah, as you pick up something, sometimes you have to let other things go.
Right.
And that was the case with the P&G Alumni Network. I couldn't keep doing that and be involved with all these other things that are more local
Right.
here. And I made the choice that I'd been doing the P&G Alumni Network since it started for 17 years. There were now younger, very talented people on the board that we had recruited that could step in and play those roles. It wasn't as important. My contribution wasn't as critical as it used to be. Whereas in these other roles, that seemed to fit better with where I was in life. And
Well, then I would have to say, when I heard more of your background, then I invited you to be a part of the planning for Think Regional, and then in turn invited you to be an instructor for Miami University Institute of Learning and Retirement. And then I think from that, the OLLI program heard of you as well. So you've also become a volunteer instructor for both of those lifelong learning programs, yes?
yeah, I actually started at ILR teaching, like short-term courses
Right.
on environment or business or one on the Cincinnati Memorial.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2005, I started to become concerned about the direction the country's leaders were going in. And I saw partisanship and money becoming greater and greater influences in how our elected leaders made choices for us. And I became concerned that the country was becoming more divisive. And I think over history, our strength as a nation, not only for our own economic and security for the future, but also as a force for good in the world, has come from our unity. We are the most diverse country in the world. And one of the things I learned in Japan is that's a homogeneous culture. Mm-hmm. China is a little more diverse because it's so big. Regions of China do have differences in culture. But, French is French and English are English and Germans are Germans. America is from all over the world.
Right, right.
And all religions, and all races and all creeds. And that's been the source of our unique strength in the world. And I saw that now becoming at risk. That unity was becoming shredded. And so I started a blog during the campaign, and that led to creating a course that I approached the Miami ILR people about teaching. Mm-hmm. And it was called, How Do We Get Congress to Serve the Nation? Parentheses,
Yes.
Instead of donors, party, and self-interest. Mm-hmm. And they were very, accommodating. So I was able to teach that course on every regional campus in the Miami University system. Then I reached out to OLLI at the University of Cincinnati, University of Dayton. So I taught it at two campuses at UC and the main campus at Dayton. So over about a 4-year period, I actually taught the course to about 220 people on 7 different campuses in 5 different counties in Southwest Ohio. And some of them are lean Democratic and some of them are very Republican.
Right.
And I was consistently getting 90% positive response people basically said, thank you for showing us how the country could come together on these issues if we began to respect and accommodate each other instead of seeing the parties as enemies of each other and fighting. Like if you're in the minority, you always fight for the majority to lose. And if you're in the majority, you make policies only for your base. That's not America, I don't think. And the other thing people say is, you've shown me ideas that could bring the country together and be more effective in solving our problems, but you've also given me hope that there's a way out of this.
Indeed.
That this doesn't have to get worse, and it doesn't have to stay.
So your current purpose-filled project is a book.
To translate the course material into a book so that I can reach more and more people. And the key part of making the principles real in the country is what I call citizen rules. Under the Constitution, the House was given the power of making all their own rules for how they operate. Senate the same. And if you've listened to any of the impeachment trial, you've seen nothing happens in the Senate unless 51 senators say that's the rule. So even though the Constitution requires a trial, which we all know means evidence, witnesses, and even though it says it's presided by the Chief Justice, we know how a judge presides over a trial. They make rulings. Mm-hmm. Their opinions count. Mm-hmm. In the Senate, because the Constitution says they make all the rules for their proceedings, they overrule the Chief Justice. They took a vote and said, no, we're not going to have the Chief Justice rule on motions or evidence. It's going to be the senators. I'm not sure that was the intention of the language. I think they would have used different language than trial and preside if the founders wanted it different. So to make changes, I think fundamentally citizens need to make the rules. After all, we are supposed to be the people that run the country, right? We choose the leaders to work for us, not vice versa. Then shouldn't we determine the rules for how we want our government to operate? We've ceded it to them, and I think objectively both parties over the last 40 years or so have shown that they aren't capable or willing to put the country ahead of partisanship.
So your book is going to hopefully be published within the next
6 months.
Okay.
3 to 6 months. And the money will be used to start a nonprofit to enact the changes via constitutional amendments, to put the rules in place. If people go to a website, they read it, and they vote, yes, I'm in favor of those rules. If I can't get 70% of the people who read it to vote yes, and I can't get over 5 million people to read it, then I don't go forward.
And what would that website address be? How would people that are interested in hearing more, how would they
I don't have it set up yet.
But they could email you of their interest.
Yes.
Okay.
I do have a blog that they can kind of read some of the policies that would come out of that kind of a win-win approach between the parties. Instead of the win-lose approach we seem to be locked in.
And that blog address, how do you access the blog?
It's there is a Facebook page, New Direction Policies, that will take you right to it.
Okay.
But the blog, if you're on a computer or a phone, is newdirectionpolicies.blogspot.com.
Okay, very good. Because it has seemed that as a result of you teaching the classes, people of all philosophies have been interested in your perspective. So, which brings us back again to that's your current purpose, which has been, it can take over your life if you let it, and I know that you try to balance other things as
do.
well. If you were to give suggestions or comments in closing to folks that are watching this program, what might that be in terms of them even beginning their journey?
Well, this is
to
one of the
purpose?
things I teach in organizational leadership, is because I'm teaching college students, and a lot of them will say, I don't know what my purpose is yet. So first thing is, how do you find out what your purpose is if you aren't lucky enough to have found it yet? So I advise this way. Start with something you love doing and you are great at it. If those two things are together, that's called a passion, right?
Right.
Now, if you combine something you love with something others need, that's called a mission. And the intersection of something you're passionate about and something that's a mission to help others is where purpose lies. So I take my students through that exercise and get them to think about those three areas.
Very good.
Something you love, something you're great at, something others need. The intersection of those things is purpose. I also share a bunch of quotes about how important purpose is to a fulfilled life.
Maybe you could just pick 2 or 3 of those quotes.
Well, one of my favorites is Winston Churchill. And he said, "We make a living by what we get in life, but we make a life by what we give." And Marion Wright Edelman said, "Service is the rent we pay for being here. It is the very purpose of life and not something you do in your spare time." There's an anonymous quote, "Find a purpose to serve, not a lifestyle to live." Another anonymous quote, "The things that excite you are not random. They are connected to your purpose. Follow them."
Very good.
And one final one is Zig Ziglar, who was a famous salesman.
Right.
And he said, "You can have everything you want in life, everything that's important to you, if you just help enough others get what they want in life."
Very good. Very good. Well, it's, as I've mentioned, that I think it's, very, as I say, very energizing, very inspiring to listen to someone that has had their entire life be so purpose-filled. And on that note, Owen and Amelia, would you like to come over here and join me for a quick second? Among all the other community
Come on over here, guys.
projects I'm involved in and so on and so forth, I would like to introduce you to my grandchildren, Amelia and Owen Abrams. And they are a big part and the top priority purpose in my life. And I'm just happy that they could join us here today. So on that note, we hope that you're feeling good, and we'd all like to say bye for now. Let's wave.
Bye.
Bye for now.